Namo tassa bhagavata arahata sammasambuddhassa.
Good morning, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. Very happy to be back at the Shah Buddhist Society. It's been quite a while since I was here. I think I was here last year, middle of last year, last June, I think. Almost a year now. And I'm very happy that tonight I'm sharing on a very interesting topic, and that is how we can tame our lust and hatred. Okay, taming lust and hatred. Today's sharing, I will use a bit of science to explain some of the teachings of the Buddha, and basically how when we see, hear, smell, taste or touch anything, that is our sensory experience, it can draw pleasant or unpleasant feelings. Everything we see, hear, smell, taste and touch, there is a feeling associated with it. It is either pleasant or unpleasant. And when they arise, they will invariably arouse our emotions. So when our emotions become aroused, we begin to react. So emotional arousal will lead to two main kinds of reaction. Lust and greed for sensations and feelings which is pleasant, and aversion and hatred for sensations and feelings that is unpleasant. Lust basically is the desire to have something, and greed is that once we have something, we never have enough, we want more. So lust actually will lead to greed. The more we lust and we begin to get what we lust for, turns to greed. And this condition is called lobha. Commonly you've heard lobha, dosa and moha. Aversion is when we experience something unpleasant, we want to avoid it. That's why it's called aversion. It comes from the word avoiding. So aversion actually turns into hatred if we can't get rid of it. Whatever that is unpleasant, if we can't avoid it and it keeps coming at us, then we begin to hate it. So aversion turns to hatred, and this condition is called dosa. And this is the reaction to unpleasant feelings and unpleasant sensations. At the same time, we experience this emotional excitement, and the arousal and the reaction collectively, that is a kind of emotional excitement. And we begin to personalize every experience. And when we personalize these experiences, we begin to form a delusion that there is a self that is being affected. For instance, when you touch something hot and your hand feels the pain, what do you say? Oh, my hand hurts. Do you say, this hand hurts? No, my hand hurts. The word my comes up. I, me, and mine. We don't realize it, but automatically the I, me, and mine arises in the mind every time we experience something. It can also be as simple as seeing a friend walking towards you, and what's the thought that arises in my mind? Right? It says, I see my friend. What is the first word? I. See, the I, me, and mine arises because we personalize every experience. And this personalization of experience is actually clinging on to this experience that is produced by the five aggregates. And this leads to the delusion, oh, I have this body that is experiencing, so this body is me. This is the most common delusions. But there are also other forms of associated delusions of creating the notion there is I, me or mine being affected. Of course, the most extreme is then to think that there is this eternal soul that never dies, that's always there, the eternal soul. And that actually is a very strong doctrine in many other religions. But in Buddhism, there is no eternal soul that we have all learned. And finally, we react, and this reaction is called tanha, commonly translated as craving. So I'm going to explain a little bit about tanha later on. So we react to these emotional excitement. So today we're going to explore from a scientific perspective about these feelings, vedana, And then our reaction of something pleasant, that is lobha. We desire lust and greed for it. And then the other reaction to unpleasant sensations, that is dosa, the aversion and hatred towards it. And finally, the delusion of a self-centered existence. All these are reactions known as tanha, emotional reactions. And we are going to also take a look not only at this problem that I've just described, but how we can overcome it, how we can actually tame these lustful and hateful arousals and bring our mind to a state of peace and enjoy a happier and more wholesome lifestyle. In order to understand all this, we must first go back to the understanding of what is the mind. A lot of people think the mind is something that exists. So if I ask you, where is your mind? Most people will either point to the head here or point to the heart. Why the heart? Because it's quite common in some languages, especially in Tibetan language, that this actually came from the Vajrayana tradition. They don't have two separate words for mind and heart. It's one word that refers to both the mind and the heart. So that's why some people say, oh, my mind is here. So very often we think it exists, but actually it doesn't exist. Where is the mind? Does it exist? So if we say something exists, that means something you can hold on to. But can you hold on to your mind? No, you can't. It is an activity. That's all it is. The mind is an activity. It's continuously ongoing. It is basically made of actually three major components. And in fact, modern scientists are beginning to formalize the concept of the mind based on the teaching of the Buddha. Not that they use the Buddha's teaching, but their conclusion came to more or less the same conclusion as what the Buddha pointed out nearly 2,600 years ago. So what did the Buddha say about the mind? He described the mind as an experience. The mind is not something you can hold on to. It's not an existence. So there's either existence, which is something that you can touch and feel, like this gadget or the computer mouse. You can touch and feel it and hold it. Or it is an experience, an activity that you can only experience. And that's what the mind is. The mind is an experience that arises from the reactions, the biochemical reactions and electrical reactions inside the brain. That reaction produces an activity that you can experience, and that experience is the mind. And the Buddha described this mental experience made of three parts. The first part he calls vijnana. Vijnana is often translated as consciousness. But the word consciousness is a little bit ambiguous, because if you ask 10 different scientists, brain scientists, or 10 different spiritual gurus, what is the meaning of consciousness? You're going to get 10 different answers. Everyone will have his own way to interpret the meaning of the word consciousness. But what the Buddha meant here with the word vijnana is actually the awareness of what the sense organs have perceived. That means we perceive something through our sense organs and we become aware of the object. And the awareness of this object is called rupa. Rupa is actually the awareness of the form of an object. Not describing the physical thing, but of course many people translate the word rupa as something physical. But actually rupa is the form that arises in the mind of something we have seen, heard, smelled, taste and touch, coming through the sense organs. So the first thing that arises is the perception that there is something I have seen, heard, smelled, taste and touch. Something the mind has seen, heard, smelled, taste and touch, and that is vijnana. So the more accurate word to describe it is perception. The perception arising from what the sense organs have picked up from the environment. Light entering the eyes, sound entering the ear, and taste of food and whatever. So these five senses bring up this awareness of an object, the rupa arising in the mind, the vijnana. And then the next part of the mind is mano, trying to interpret what is this that I have seen, heard, smelled, taste and touch. So this is really known as cognitive process. The process where it tries to cognize what has been perceived through the sense organs. And this process of cognizing categorizes the perception. So it categorized interpretation of the perception, and then we begin to give meaning to it. Giving meaning to what we have seen, heard, smell, taste, and touch arises with giving some label, a name, and that is the nama. This is where rupa and nama arise. Rupa is the form that arises in the mind of what we have seen, heard, smell, taste, and touch. Nama is the label, the name we give to it, to give meaning to it. What is this? This is a computer mouse. And how do we know this is a computer mouse? Because this looks like all the computer mouses you have ever seen in your life. Many of you have only seen this for the first time, and yet you know this is a computer mouse. This is not exactly the same mouse as the type of mouse you're using, but it looks like it. So this is what is known as categorized interpretation. Everything we interpret is categorized and giving meaning. So that is the nama that is being given. And then at the same time, the mind begins to react to this. And this reaction is called the affective process. That's why it's called the affective process, because it affects the entire processing. Right? And this affective process is commonly called emotions. Right? For lack of a better word, just the broad word to describe this affective process is emotion. This is reacting to pleasant or unpleasant feelings that arouse these emotions, and it leads to this emotional excitement and the reaction tanha. And at the same time, this part of the mind, the chitta, begins to personalize this experience with the notion that there is a self that is being affected. So this personalizing of the experience is the arising of the thought, I, me, and mine. Every time we see something, I see something. Every time we touch something, I touch something. You never say, this hand is holding this mouse. We never say that. I am holding my mouse. You see? The I, me, and mine. You think about it. Everything you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, the I, me, and mine comes up. That is something that we have been doing for eons, and that actually has been conditioned into our mind that this I, me, and mine arises. This is clinging on to that experience. Right. So we're going to take a look at how all this is happening, very briefly, but using science. So the easy way is, of course, to use diagrams. So I'm going to use a little diagram to show you this whole process of experience. Right. Experience is really a chain reaction. One thing leads to another. And this chain reaction goes on and on and on. And the big picture of this chain reaction the Buddha has taught us, and that is called the paticca samuppada. That is the chain reaction, right? The dependent origination, that is the common translation for it. But I'm just going to show you from a scientific perspective a very brief part of it. When things happen in the environment, light entering the eyes and sound entering the ear, it stimulates our sense organs. We have 5 sense organs: the ear, the nose, the eye, the tongue, and the body. And we begin to experience it. The moment these sense organs are stimulated by activities in the environment, a perception arises in the mind. And this is the result of the 5 aggregate panchakanda. Because of these 5 aggregate, we now have perceived something through the sense organs. So this vijnana arises in the mind. Oh, I have seen something. That gives us the ability to see, hear, smell, taste, and touch because of this process that's going on. Now, that is the only thing that is really going on. The rest is mind-made. That's where the mind-made part comes in. The mind begins to process it and creates ideas and concepts from it. And the part that processes it rationally is called mano. And this is our cognitive process. It interprets the meaning based on past experiences. So those of you who see this and straight away know this is a mouse, this is because you have seen hundreds or maybe thousands of mouses in the past. And straight away it looks like the mouse that you have seen. This looks like it's a categorized memory. So the mind refers to this categorized memory to interpret it and give meaning. And giving meaning is the process called papancha. And this papancha produces the ability to recognize, recognition. We begin to recognize what has been seen, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched. And this recognition is a categorized identity of what has been perceived through the sense organs. And this is why the mind produces this thought, what is this that I have seen? I see a mouse, I see mineral water, I see this, and I see the computer, I see Billy Tan sitting here. That I, me and mine arises. At the same time, everything we sense from the environment, every sensation, stimulus, is either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. In fact, they are mostly pleasant and unpleasant. Right? And then the chitta part of the mind, the affective process part of the mind arises to react to it. The chitta reacts. The chitta doesn't interpret. The chitta cannot think. The chitta just simply reacts to it. And basically, this produces the whole cycle of activity known commonly as emotions. Now, emotions is made of two dimensions, and this is something that today modern science has already accepted it. Until about maybe 150 years ago, scientists used to debate whether emotion is something physical or mental. But since about 150 years ago, it had become very clear. A very famous psychologist then, William James, described it that emotions is basically begins with something physiological, and finally it leads to psychological. So in other words, it's not purely in the mind. People used to think, in ancient times, people used to think, emotion is all in the mind. But actually it's not. It begins with the body. Right? And how does it begin? It begins because of two activities, the arousal and then the reaction. The arousal is the feeling of what has been perceived. That feeling is called Vedana, that feeling. It is pleasant or unpleasant. And then the reaction is to react to the Vedana. And this is commonly translated as craving. But this is actually an emotional reaction, tanha, commonly translated as craving. So, depending on whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, there is the reaction. Now, before we talk about that mental reaction, I want to talk about the physical reaction. Because the moment the brain detects these sensations, either pleasant or unpleasant, it actually produces a biochemical chain reaction. It causes the release of hormones, whether it is something pleasant or unpleasant. And the release of hormones disturbs the body. And this is called stressor. Stressor basically describes the conditions that create stress. And stress here, I define it as the physical part of it. The physiological reactions. The physical part of emotion is stress, commonly called stress. So that is actually dukkha, a kind of suffering. And this is the physiological disturbance to the body whenever we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch something where there is a feeling of pleasant or unpleasant feeling associated with it. We don't realize it, but throughout the day, 24/7, you continuously react. You are continuously feeling the sensations of stress. You don't realize it. Even one single word can trigger it. I'll give you, some of you may have heard this before, but I'll do it again. I say one word, and then you will begin to feel it. At the moment, your mouth may feel very neutral, but I'm going to say the word asam laksa. And some of you will begin to feel sourness in your mouth, right? And that sourness in your mouth is a biochemical reaction. And those of you who think like, oh no, I don't feel anything, there are only two reasons why you don't feel anything. One, that feeling may be so subtle that it may not be noticeable in a way. Two, sorry to say, you're not very mindful. You're not aware of some changes. Now I'm going to stress you further. So I apologize for doing this, but for most of you, in fact all of us, in our early days going to school, we used to go to school and we used to, those days the teacher didn't have the luxury of a whiteboard and a marker pen. What did they use? Chalk and blackboard. And when the teacher uses a brand new chalk to write, often it makes a funny sound, doesn't it? Squeak, 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 all this funny sound, right? And then when the teacher has finished writing on the board, everybody finished copying, the teacher will say to one of the students, okay, please come and erase it. And some of these students are very naughty. They have very long nails. What do they like to do? They come up to the board and they like to scratch the board and it goes, eeeeee. Now, how many of you are feeling something in your body right now? You see? This is biochemical reaction going on in your body. Question number one, do I have a blackboard here? No. Am I scratching a blackboard? No. I'm just describing it to you. And your memory triggers that experience in your mind, and then you begin to feel it in the body. And this also points out one very important thing. The mind cannot differentiate what is physically happening versus what is mentally created. What I have described to you, was it physically happening? No. It's mentally created. Because I reminded you, I described it to you, your mind followed along with my description. So the body actually cannot differentiate. The brain and the body cannot differentiate. The central nervous system will react to any thought. So in a way, you can see that we are experiencing it 24/7 throughout the day. Everything we see, hear, smell, taste and touch reminds us of something, and then there is this sensation going on, this bodily reaction. And what is this bodily reaction? You see, so I'm going to describe it from a physical perspective. Physically, when we see, hear, smell, taste or touch something, the brain sends a signal through the central nervous system and goes down the spinal cord, and it reaches various glands. One of the glands it reaches is our adrenal gland, which releases two very powerful hormones. There are a few more other hormones being released, but the two very powerful ones are adrenaline and cortisol. And what do? They begin to spread throughout the body through our blood circulation. And when they reach the heart beats faster. Blood pressure rises. And then that speeds up the blood circulation. At the same time, when it reaches the lungs, it causes the respiration to hasten, speed up. Right? And then it causes muscles to be all tensed up and so on. Not only that, it actually causes the hair to stand on end. You see, just now when you were feeling goose pimples, some of you were feeling goosebumps, goose pimple. That is hair standing on end actually. Yeah? When you see a frightening movie and then you freeze up and then your hair starts to stand on end. Right? In Cantonese they call it mo gun tong. So you get this goosebumps or goose pimple. That is hair standing on end. And then at the same time, your facial expression distorts. Just now when I was describing it, even before I got to the point of scratching the board, I saw many of you already all cringed up, you see. Facial expression distorts. And then some of you may start to perspire and so on. Many reactions in the body. And internally, it also causes the release of more sugar in the blood. Right? So blood sugar rises and basically immune system is suspended. So all this process is very unhealthy to you. Immune system being suspended, what does it do to you? It makes you fall sick very easily. So the more you are stressed, the easier you're going to fall sick. That's what it is. And by the way, I'll talk about it later. Yeah, the more you are stressed, the more easily you feel sick. And then your blood sugar rises. What does it do to you? It makes you diabetic. And then you perspire, you lose body temperature. You can become sick from that. Facial expression distorts. What does it do to you? It causes wrinkles all over your face. Right? You can see when people prematurely have a lot of wrinkles, that probably means, well, not always, but most likely, it also means the person has undergone an emotional life. But people who are happy, generally, who find ways to be happy about things, are grateful and easily happy about things, they have very smooth skin, like mine. Yeah. They don't get wrinkles all over the face. And then, of course, your pupils dilate. What happens if your pupils dilate too frequently? As you age, your eyesight weakens. And then hair stands on end. When it does that too often, sooner or later, there's no more hair to stand on end. And then muscles all tensed up. You get neck ache, back ache, shoulder ache, this kind of ache, that kind of ache, all kinds of aches, And then you need your OPM. You need your massage therapy and all kinds of things to overcome these aches, but these are only short term. Then the aches come back and then very tense. This is one thing I want to suggest to you. Those of you, especially the husbands, I learned this very quickly when I discovered this. You want to know whether your wife is very stressed. All you have to do is just touch this shoulder here. People who are stressed, this part of the shoulder feels like a rock. Yeah. So you can actually feel it. If you find your shoulder here not pressing down easily, the flesh on top, you are experiencing some kind of stress, because that causes that one of the first muscles that tense up is this muscle. And that, very stiff. And even when I hold my strength also, I can still press it down very softly. Right? So for husbands, you want to know whether what you have done is upset your wife. You just walk up to her and gently touch that shoulder, like just patting her. And then if you feel it's hard as a rock, get out of the way. Yeah. So all this is happening. And then if you breathe too rapidly, you go into hyperventilation. Some people develop asthmatic symptoms. And if you have blood pressure rising frequently, what happens? You become hypertensive. You experience hypertension. And not only that, if your heart beats too fast, too often, because you've been stressed too regularly. We know that scientists have always described that the heart is a pump that has a lifetime. So if the heart that has a lifetime of so many billion beats in a lifetime, so if it beats too frequently, too often, too much, what does it do to your lifespan? You live shorter. So you think there are so many things that really creates this suffering. This is one of the suffering. So suffering is not just about something tormenting, something big and severe. Just simple things like hearing the word asam laksa is suffering. To some people, even seeing a bottle of mineral water can be suffering. Why? Maybe in their childhood, they play with their brothers and sisters and the brother tried to shove a bottle of mineral water in the mouth. And that person has a traumatic experience. So every time the person sees a bottle of mineral water, the person frees up, gets into stress mode. So we're experiencing that without realizing it continuously, 24/7, it's happening to us. So this is a kind of suffering, stress. We have also other kinds of suffering produced mentally, but here I describe to you simple little physiological disturbance in the body. In fact, to talk about suffering, we go back to the Buddha's first sermon, the DHAMMACAKKAPPAVATTANA Sutra, where the Buddha spoke about the Four Noble Truths. A lot of people thought the Four Noble Truths is all about suffering. Oh no! The Four Noble Truths is about the solution to suffering. In other words, the Buddha was not talking about suffering. The Buddha was talking about the solution to our suffering. If you go to see the doctor, what are you seeking? You are seeking medication, you are seeking doctor's treatment to help you what? Free you from the sickness. So, is the doctor an evil person? Is the doctor representing doom? No. The doctor represents solution. And that's what the Four Noble Truths is. The Four Noble Truths is about the solution to our suffering. And basically the Buddha said the first thing, there is suffering. We have to recognize there is. What kind of suffering there is. And then how does it arise? That is the second noble truth, the origin of suffering. And then the fact that it can be stopped, this suffering, we can overcome it. And finally, the way leading to how we can stop this suffering. So this is, in a nutshell, the Four Noble Truths. If we examine the first noble truth, there is suffering. So the first noble truth talks about suffering. Dukkha. The Buddha described 8 kinds of suffering in this first noble truth. The first 4 are very straightforward. Birth, aging, sickness, and death. Right. Then the Buddha went on to describe the other 4, which are very much mind-made. First, separation from what is pleasing. That means if we have experienced something pleasant, something enjoyable, and now we no longer have it, that is suffering. Those of you, I think some of you probably you love to eat durian. What happens if tomorrow the Ministry of Health announced that there is a plague and all durian are infested and anyone who takes durian can die immediately. So we have to stop all durian, burn down all the durian plantations. How would you feel? You're a durian lover. Then you feel, oh, no more durian for the rest of my life. Oh my God, that kind of thing. So this is this suffering which is to be separated from something that you have enjoyed. The other one is to be together with something you know is unpleasant. Physically, it can be your neighborhood. You live in a neighborhood and your next door neighbor is very noisy, always having party until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Very noisy and you can't sleep. So you got very fed up. So one day you decide, move somewhere else. And you decide to buy a small little place somewhere in another neighborhood. Maybe Satya Alam instead of Shah Alam. So you go to Satya Alam. And you move in. Wonderful. It's a new area, new township. All the houses are brand new. You move in happily, enjoying it for the first month. And then you notice the next door was bought over by someone and he moved in. Who just moved in? Your own neighbor. Then you become together with something that is displeasing. Union with something that is displeasing. And then you get, I shouldn't have bought this one. And so on and so forth. You see? That is suffering. Then the 7th kind of suffering is basically that we have a wish for something. We have an aspiration. We hope to do something. We hope that the business will improve. If we run a business, the business is not doing well, we hope that next year business will get better. We hope that if you don't like a certain politician, you hope that next election they will kick out that politician and the next one comes on. But unfortunately, it can't always happen the way we want it, We wish for something, but it never happens. So not to get what you wish for, that is also suffering. But finally, the last one is the most powerful one, the one that is hurting us all the time. And that is clinging on to 5 aggregates. Whenever we experience something and we begin to personalize it, and that personalization makes it really suffering. If you learn to let go, there is no suffering. Right? So basically, if you knock your hand against the wall or you touch something hot and it hurts, of course, the hurting is there. There's no doubt about it. But if you begin to personalize it and say, my hand just hurt. It's so painful. The rest of my day will be spoiled. Now, if you can begin to think like that, it is a self-professing prophecy. The rest of the day will be spoiled because you constantly think about, my hand is hurting. My hand is hurting. My hand is hurting the whole day long. So your whole day long, you are destroying the happiness of your day. So this clinging on to every experience. This 5 aggregate produces an experience, and we cling on to this experience. That is suffering. And that is actually the biggest form of suffering. Now, the first 4, I think, is very straightforward, so we're not going to talk about it. Birth, aging, sickness, and death. But let's talk about the others. Separation. This is basically produces a regretful feeling that pleasurable experiences have come to an end, no longer. So we remember past experiences that were pleasant. And that brings us suffering. The reminder itself is suffering. The next one, to be with something unpleasant, right? We begin to be fearful that painful experiences will come back and haunt us. Something we don't want, will come and hurt us. This is because of our imagination. And then the third one, we wish for something. We have expectations of getting it. But unfortunately, it is not satisfied. So dissatisfied that these desires, wishes are not fulfilled from our expectations. So these are the 3 things in the mind that produces suffering. Memory, imagination, expectations. And finally, the last one, because we personalize this experience. And this process of personalization is upadana. And this is commonly translated as clinging, attachment, right? Personalization. I think the more accurate psychological term is personalization. We personalize it. Of course, some people say clinging on to it, and some people say attachment to it. And when we begin to do that, we begin to produce this delusion in the mind that there is a self being affected. Right? That this self is, in some cases, it's even thinking that this self is everlasting soul. But basically to imagine that there is a self being affected. But what goes on in the environment is not personal. It is not targeting you. You get what you do. There is the law of karma. What happens in your life is associated with what you have been doing in your present life and in your past lives. So all this is going on and we begin to personalize it, and this leads to the delusion and the ignorance that there is a self being affected by it. So when we experience this, we begin to think of this thought. How does this affect me? The me, mine, I, me, and mine is so strong. So now let's go back to the flow chart and see what happens. When we have these physiological disturbances going on, and we begin to feel this physiological disturbance in the body, that is when the mental part comes in. The psychological disturbance arises because of that. The chitta, this is the emotional mind, the chitta begins to react to it. I want to point out very importantly, a lot of people don't differentiate what is mano, what is chitta. They collectively call it mind. But actually my teacher, I'm very thankful to my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, he has explained to me very thoroughly that the mind actually is made of two types of experiences. There are two parts of the mind. The thinking mind, which is the mano, and the emotional mind, which is the chitta. So the chitta is aroused, and then it begins to produce thoughts that lead to emotional excitement. And the mind begins to run away, mental proliferation. When it does that, it disturbs the thinking mind. And to the point that the thinking mind cannot think rationally. So when you're stressed, it's very difficult for you to think rationally. Right? A lot of people they try to be very smart. They say, even when I'm very stressed, I am a very rational thinker. Oh, that's what they believe in. But actually, when you are stressed, your thinking mind is affected by the conditions of the body. Think about it. When you are sick, when you wake up in the morning with a very severe headache and running nose, does it make you enjoy the rest of the day easily? No, your mind gets disturbed by the bodily condition. At the same time, if something happened in your life that is very traumatic, a very close person passed away, and your mind is very disturbed now, does it make you feel healthy and strong? No. Mind and body are intertwined in that sense. Problems with the body, the sickness of the body can actually disturb the mind. And processes of the mind can affect the conditions of the body. Right? So this is really what's going on. And this disturbance is a psychological disturbance called domanassa. Distress. So I use the word distress. The Buddha described 5 different types of dukkha. Right? So this is domanassa. It's a psychological disturbance. So in the second noble truth, the Buddha described the cause of suffering then. First, he says it is this craving on tanha. And I'm using conventional translations from Bhikkhu Bodhi. Right? So it says this is the craving which leads to renewed existence. And this craving, there is firstly a craving for sensual pleasures. Secondly, there is a craving for non-existence. And thirdly, there is a craving for continued existence. There are 3 kinds of these cravings. And the first kind, craving for sensual pleasures, this is lobha, lust and greed for pleasures. This craving for non-existence is to get rid of something which you don't like. That is dosa, the aversion and hatred towards displeasures. And then this craving for continued existence is the delusion that there is a self that exists and therefore I want the self to continue to exist. And that is moha, the delusion of self-centered existence. Who wants to die tomorrow? No, nobody. Who wants to die next week? How about next month? How about end of this year? Anybody wants to die? No. We want to continue to exist. That is the craving for continued existence. And this craving is really tanha. And tanha, according to my teacher, a more accurate psychological explanation of the meaning of tanha is emotional reaction. And that makes a lot of sense. If it is something you don't like, if you use the word craving, can you be craving for something you don't like? That's why the word craving can be very confusing. If you come across something you hate, you want to get rid of it, how can you be craving for it? Right? So, therefore, this is really emotional reaction. So, if you to reread those sentences, replace the word craving with emotional reaction, then it is the emotional reaction that leads to renewed existence. It is our emotional reaction that leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. It is the emotional reaction for sensual pleasures. Emotional reaction for non-existence. Emotional reaction for continued existence. And we look at these three. The emotional reaction, tanha, for these three. Firstly, if it is pleasant sensation, it is lobha, the lust and greed for pleasures. And this reaction is basically the craving for sensual pleasures called karma tanha. And this word karma here is not talking about cause and effect. This is really talking about sensual pleasure. It is spelled with only one M, right, in the Pali, and with the A and the dash on top. So karma, right? Karma tanha. That is craving for sensual pleasures. Unpleasant experience leads to dosa. This is avoiding it or getting rid of it. If you can't get rid of it, you begin to hate it. Right? So aversion and hatred towards displeasures. This is called vibhava tanha. And it's craving for non-existence. Bhava basically means existence, being. Right? And V in front of it makes it the opposite. Non-existence. So craving for non-existence. Vibhava tanha. And the third type, neutral sensation, leads to moha. Moha is the delusion of self-centered existence. And this is really bhava tanha, bhava, existence, tanha, right? The emotional reaction, wanting to continue to exist. So craving for continued existence. So these are the three types of tanha, which collectively called Akusala Mula. Akusala Mula comes from the word kusala. Kusala means wholesome and skillful means. And akusala, the A in front, makes it the opposite, meaning unwholesome, unskillful. Mula, actually, a lot of us don't realize it. Some of us may already know that. Bahasa Malaysia, some of Bahasa Malaysia words are derived from Sanskrit. Pali is derived from Sanskrit. So there are a number of terms that are common between Bahasa Malaysia and Pali. Mula is one of them. Nama, rupa, they are also amongst them. Right? If you think about it, rupa, there is a Malay word for it, which means appearance, form. Nama, name, label, right? Nama, rupa. So here, mula, the beginning, the root. So akusala mula means the root of unwholesome experiences. Right? Unwholesome reactions. So these are the three unwholesome roots, which sometimes is translated as three evil roots. Akusala mula. Actually, I don't like the word evil. It is unwholesome, meaning that it doesn't help you, it doesn't benefit you. To call something evil, you are being judgmental. And this is a common term used in other religions. The better word to use, if we were to understand the Buddha's teaching, is to use the word unwholesome when we come across word that says evil. So it's unwholesome roots, akusala mula. But we sometimes can't avoid it. We often use the word evil. There's a very interesting sutra. There are a few sutras in there in the Majjhima Nikaya, Book of Threes. 69 talks about those the roots, the three kinds of roots, wholesome and unwholesome. But 68, Book 3, 68 is a very interesting description there. The Buddha actually mentioned to the disciples what happens if other sects, other different religious groups come and ask a Buddhist, what are those three things that arise? The lust, the hatred, and the delusion. Okay, so the Buddha basically was speaking to his disciples about people from other religious beliefs or other spiritual following. It says, Bhikkhus, wanderers of other sects may ask you, friends, there are these three things. What three? Greed, hatred, and delusion. These are the three. What, friends, is the distinction, the disparity, and the difference between these three? If you are asked, how would you answer? And then the Buddha went on to explain. So there were a few things the Buddha said, and then finally he explained about those three. He says, Bhikkhus, if wanderers of other sects should ask you such a question, you should answer them as follows. Lust, friends, is slightly blameworthy but slow to fade away. Hatred is very blameworthy but quick to fade away. Delusion is very blameworthy but slow to fade away. So here the Buddha is actually describing whether that condition, how so-called evil is this, for lack of a better word, basically how unwholesome it can be. So when he spoke about lust, this is what he meant. When we talk about lobha, it's basically the lust and greed is less evil than the other two in that sense. For lack of a better word, I'll use the word evil. But it can also be unwholesome, less unwholesome than the other two. But difficult to get rid of, difficult to give up. See, lust, when we greed for something, right, it's very difficult to stop it. When I read that and understood it, I was so happy because now I realize why I can't lose weight. Because I love food. I have given up a lot of things in life. But food is one of those things that is the last, for me, it's the last bastion, the last thing that I'm trying to give up, right? Enjoying food. So then I realized why it is so difficult to give up this pleasure for food, right? So lust is something not so evil compared to the other two, not so unwholesome, but very difficult to give up. And hatred, now, as you can see, lust will only cause a lot of harm to yourself unless it turns into hatred. But lust can turn into hatred. I'll talk about that later. But when it becomes hatred, or when you experience hatred, it can hurt other people, right? That's why it says it is more unwholesome. It is more evil. But easy, relatively easier to abandon. And finally, the third one, very difficult. And it is really very unwholesome. It is very unwholesome and also very difficult to abandon. Now, why did I say lust can turn into hatred? If you lust for something, you want more of it. The more you get, the more greedy you get. And greed, when you greed for something, and you're not getting enough of what you are greedy for, you begin to behave in unwholesome ways. Right? Let's say a very successful businessman, he is earning a lot of money, but he is greedy for more. He wants more profit. He starts to do things to his products. Contaminate it, dilute it, import inferior raw material. Right? We hear of so many fake rice, fake eggs. These are all greedy for profit. And what does it do? It begins to produce unwholesome outcome. Right? It begins to hurt other people. So lust can turn into hatred. You have to be careful. Lust becomes greed. Greed, if it goes further, becomes hatred. You begin to want to hurt people. You knowingly hurt people. People who produce fake eggs, fake rice, fake all kinds of stuff. They know it hurts people and yet they will do it because they already have ill will in their mind. So lust and greed can lead to ill will. You have to be aware of that, right? But it is difficult to give up this lust and greed. Ill will, hatred, they are relatively easier to give up compared to the other two. Right? We'll talk about that later, because basically, if you are angry with someone, if you learn to relax, take a deep breath, your anger subsides. So it's quite easy. But if you lust for something, you see the very nice food, you're durian lover, enter a durian party, you can't stop eating, can you? Yeah? Can you say, oh, no, I have enough, right? Musang King, no need, I don't want to try Musang King, no need. Will you do that? Oh, no. See? So these are the three things. And let's take a look at what Bhikkhu Bodhi said, his commentary. He says, lust is less blameworthy with the example of marriage. So he used marriage as an example to say marriage arises because a boy and a girl, they begin to lust for each other physically and then emotionally, and then they get married and settle down. So in a way, it is arising rooted in sexual desires, and it is socially accepted for men and women to marry. So therefore, lust is less blameworthy, right? Less unwholesome, and in regard to the karmic consequence, right? Whereas it is hard to remove, hard to get rid of. The solution to end lust and greed is difficult, right? And then hatred and delusions are both regarded as blamable in society, and that means they're severely blamable, seriously unwholesome, and because they have severe karmic consequences. It produces bad karma when you practice too much of hatred and delusions. Hatred, however, is connected with displeasure. And since beings naturally desire to be happy, it's easier to abandon, relatively easy to get rid of. Whereas delusion is something that is ingrained in us. It is deep-rooted in craving or emotional reactions, in wrong views or conceit. And therefore, it is very hard to remove, the hardest to remove of the three. So if you look at these three conditions and the removal of them, when you are able to remove everything, all defilements, your mind becomes pure and you will reach a state where you will reach the highest level of cultivation and become an arahant. Becoming an arahant means you are able to get rid of what is called the 10 fetters. Now, if you look at those 10 fetters, at the bottom of it, that is really talking about the delusion part, right? It is deep-rooted in conceit, and it causes the mind to be restless and agitated, and it actually leads to ignorance or not knowing, unconsciousness, avijja, right? So that's why these are the last three of the 10 fetters, the hardest to get rid of completely, right? So that's really what it means. So let's take a look, not so much further about the evilness or the unwholesomeness of these things. We know how unwholesome they could be. Let's take a look at our daily life, how we can overcome them. So we go back to this chart where we experience this physical stress in the body, and then the mind becomes disturbed. What happens? The chitta is aroused. And the chitta begins to want to do something, want to react to it. React in terms of lust or greed, aversion or hatred, or delusion of self-centered existence. This wanting to do something is volition. Chetana. Intention. Some call this intention. But volition is a fairly good word. Right? The conscious intention to want to do something. Right? So this is really intentional. Chetana. And we know that the three will go together. Intention goes together with our actions, karma. Now, this intention is self-centered in nature. How is it self-centered? It is self-centered because, firstly, this intention could be the result of fear of unknown, right? Of future outcomes. Not knowing what's going to happen next. So now we have certain fear, and that leads to a certain intention. And this is really because of our imagination. Our mind begins to wander off. And then there is another kind of self-centeredness. Insecure about gaining the pleasant experiences or getting rid of the unpleasant experiences. So this is from the past. And therefore we have memory of these pleasant and unpleasant experiences. This is arising from memory. And the third one is basically wanting something but not getting it. Expectations of familiarity, of permanence, of comfort and security in the present moment. And this is really because of expectations. These are the three: imagination, memory, expectation. I-M-E. I call this the I-M-E syndrome. Or, seen in another way, the I-me syndrome. Everything is about I, me. What I want, what I don't want. Right? What I wish to get, what I wish for from my imagination, memory, expectation. And it leads us to behave in a certain way. And these experiences or reactions can lead to a lot of suffering. Simple example. Human beings are the only creatures, the only species of animal that regret the past, is fearful of the future, and never satisfied with the present moment. That's who we are. We're always thinking about past experiences and regretting that it is over. We're always imagining things in the future and fearful that bad things can happen to us, good things no longer stay with us. And then when we look around, we are never grateful. We are always dissatisfied. We find reasons to be unhappy. We're very good at finding reasons to be unhappy. We are not so good when it comes to finding reasons to be happy. That's why we are dissatisfied. That's why there is dukkha. because of our emotional reaction. And this sutra, this brief from this sutra actually sums it up very quickly. Now, I'm using conventional translation here, right? So it says, the world is led around by mind. By mind, it's dragged here and there. Mind is the one thing that has all under its control. Now, notice the word is translated as mind. As I mentioned to you before, a lot of scholars do not differentiate between the two words, mano and chitta. They collectively translate both words as mind. Now, if you read this as it is, it makes a bit of sense, but it is not so clear. I will give you an alternate translation from my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punanji, which makes it even clearer now. Emotions dominate the world. Emotions create distress. Distress is mental suffering. Emotion is that one thing to which all are spellbound. Why? Because Buddha used the word chitta. Chitta is the emotional mind. Here, the Buddha used the word chitta to mean it is the emotional mind that is creating all this suffering. And we become trapped in our own emotional reaction. So emotion is actually the key to our suffering. This is, to understand emotion is to help us understand how we can get rid of suffering. When we become too emotional, we are suffering all the time. Emotional people suffer more than non-emotional people. That is a fact. We all know that. People who are very emotional, they suffer more. Right? It can be for good reasons. You're emotional towards someone, someone else's suffering. Then you also suffer along with it, right? But the fact remains, people who are emotional, they tend to suffer more. Now we go back to that intention, right? With that intention, lust, greed, hatred, delusions, we begin to want to take action. You see, cetana leads to karma. The intention, the volition leads to the action. And action as a result of emotional reaction is often unskillful means. And the third thing, these three always go together, is outcome, vipaka. So these three always go together. Cetana, karma, vipaka. Volition, action, and consequence. And this consequence will come back and haunt us. Whether it is immediately or later on, or towards the end of our life, or in the next life, but it will come back to haunt us. So therefore, there is this reaction of coming back, right? So this is really the process of experience. So I hope the flow chart has helped you understand better this whole process of experience that leads to our cetana, karma, and vipaka. Now that is the spiritual side of the description. Let's talk a bit about the physical side. What is the physical side? What goes on in the body and the brain? See, it's all because we have this thing called the central nervous system. That's what goes on in the body and the brain. The central nervous system is made of the spinal cord and the brain. The spinal cord is connected to the rest of the body through the peripheral nervous system, so that all the sense organs are connected and they bring information to the brain. When we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch something, the information is brought to the brain, and then the brain sends instructions to the rest of the body to react. We touch something hot, we withdraw our hand. We see something unpleasant, we want to walk away. So all this is because of the reactions that is produced inside the brain in a physical sense. So if we look at the brain is made of three parts. The oldest part is the brain stem, which is responsible for keeping us alive, our breathing, our digestion, our heart rate, and so on. And then comes the middle part of the brain, which is the limbic system. Some call it the emotional brain. And this is the part of the brain that is responsible for our suffering. Emotional reaction is what causes a lot of suffering. Then the outer part of the brain is our thinking brain. And this is the cerebral cortex. And it is this part of the brain that can be responsible for our happiness. In other words, we may react to something emotionally because of activity inside the limbic system. But at the same time, if we were to use our thinking brain, our cerebral cortex, and think rationally, we are able to overcome that in some ways and bring more happiness in our life. So basically, if we were to look at what really, at the root of it, what really is the cause of this suffering? What is making us suffer so much physically, right? So deep inside the emotional brain, the limbic system, there is a part of the brain called the amygdala. And this is it. This is the key word, amygdala. A-M-Y-G-D-A-L-A, amygdala. This is the tissue that is deep inside the middle part of the brain, which can actually cause a lot of suffering to us. What does it do? The amygdala senses environmental stimulations, right? And what is it trying to do? It is evolved to protect us. If it senses something that may become a threat or a danger to us, it causes reaction to protect us. You touch something hot and then your hand draws away. Part of that reaction is because of the amygdala. You walk down the street and through the corner of your eye, something approaches you very quickly. It could be a car out of control heading towards you. What happens to you? Do you have time to think? Do you look at it and say, oh, what is this coming towards me? Is it a car? Is it a truck? Oh, if it is a car or a truck, if it comes and runs over me, it will kill me. I will die. Oh, maybe it's time for me to jump out of the way. Do you have time to think like that? Oh no. Your amygdala reacts. Your amygdala causes your muscles to react and quickly you jump out of the way. So this reaction is there to save you, protect you. So this reaction actually is often called fight or flight reaction. If it is something harmful and your body can react and fight against it, you will fight. You will push it away, right? If you walk down the street and somebody wants to rob you and comes towards you, if you are bigger than him and he's not having a gun or a parang, probably you can punch him and run away, you see? That punching him is the fight part. But sometimes you see something and then you see danger, you quickly turn around and run. That is the flight part. So this is the fight or flight reaction. This is what the amygdala has evolved to do. The amygdala evolved to protect you from harm. But at the same time, the amygdala has paradoxical roles. So there are really two opposite roles. This is the paradox of the amygdala. It has two paradoxical roles. The first one I just described to you. It is there to protect you from harm. It serves as your bodyguard. But there is a second thing. It can be aroused unnecessarily. And then it becomes a terrorist in your brain. How does that happen? For example, you're sitting there reading a book peacefully, reading a Dhamma book in your couch. Your family member comes from behind and without you realizing it, the person touches you on the shoulder. What normally happens? If you're deep in concentration and somebody suddenly touches you on the shoulder, you get a shock, you see? And that is the amygdala reacting. Now, if that happens frequently, that can actually cause a lot of harm in the body. It causes you to suffer a lot. Even the simple word like asam laksa, this is actually the amygdala reacting, right? So all these are reactions that can lead to a lot of suffering. So it is in a way a terrorist in your brain. So we all have this terrorist in the brain. It is both a paradoxical role, a bodyguard and a terrorist. Right? In fact, in history, some people were killed by their bodyguard. I think some of you may know Indira Gandhi, the lady Prime Minister of India. She was killed by her own bodyguard. Right? So this is really what's going on. Your bodyguard could be the one that is causing you harm, hurt, or even death. Right? Heart attack and all this. So how does lust and hatred affect the mind? So let's take a look at a scientific explanation. What the scientists have to say about this lust or greed. The science of lobha. Remember the word amygdala is the part of the brain that brings you suffering. And cerebral cortex, the thinking brain, especially the front one, this is called the prefrontal cortex here, PFC, prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that can help you think through your problems and help you become happier. So in other words, you have a part of the brain that brings you suffering and a part of the brain that can help you bring you happiness. So let's listen to what the scientists have to say about this.
In Seattle, Washington, scientists are attempting to map the exact neural architecture of human sexuality. Dr. Ken Maravilla investigates how lust and sexuality affect each part of the human brain. He uses two technologies. One is the MRI machine. The other technology is a simple DVD player.
Our subjects are presented a stimulus that consists of sexually explicit scenes that promote their ability to become aroused in the magnet.
The experiment is simple. Subjects are shown neutral videos to get a baseline. Then, images become more sexually explicit for several minutes, while Maravilla and his staff voyeuristically watch as the subjects' brains change.
We have areas in the frontal lobes that are associated with reward and pleasant feelings, and these become active with arousal. The amygdala often becomes activated, and this is one of the decision-making, evaluative areas of the brain.
The MRI shows that as subjects are sexually aroused, there is an intriguing corollary to the new findings.
We also found that certain areas of the brain seem to become less active, and they appear to be areas that are related to a moral judgment, of inhibition, if you will.
When the lust areas of the brain light up, the judgment areas of the brain begin to turn off. The conclusion? The more aroused a person, the less access they have to clear judgment. It would seem that science shows a direct connection between lust and poor judgment. The theory supports the basic premise of sociologists studying this area of human behavior.
Sins are good, they're adaptive. Sexual desire is normal and appropriate and healthy. Lust is a term we give when there's too much of it or it's inappropriate.
So that is about lust and greed. Right? The amygdala itself also reacts. So the amygdala is not only doing something which creates evil thoughts or what, but it is also making you become lustful because the amygdala reacts. The amygdala doesn't really care what it perceives. What it is caring is whether it appears as a threat or it can actually be something that is pleasurable. So the amygdala will react and causes all these biochemical reactions in the body. Then next, we're going to take a look at this signs of anger and hatred. Right?
Today, scientists are beginning to examine exactly where anger comes from.
The brain perceives a lot of information, both from the outside world and from inside the body. And there is one part of the brain called the amygdala that serves the function of sifting through all that information and asking one question. Is this a threat? Is this something I should worry about?
Dr. Ruben Gur has zeroed in on the amygdala as the key instigator of anger. This walnut-sized lobe can quickly overwhelm the brain with uncontrollable rage.
Once there is a perception of danger, there is a cascade of responses in the body that includes changes in heart rate, in blood pressure, in sweating. It makes your body ready to fight or flee.
The amygdala is a primitive part of the brain. It exists because the human brain is made up of layers that were added on top of each other over the millions of years of evolution.
All those other older brains are still alive and well inside your own brain. So you have a part of you that thinks like a dog, and you have a part of you that thinks like a crocodile, and a part of you that thinks like a monkey.
The amygdala creates an automatic fight or flight response to threats. But human beings have evolved another part of the brain, the frontal lobes.
This area that you can see here in the front is the orbital frontal region, And the orbital frontal regions are like brakes for the amygdala. If you can think of the amygdala as being the engine for the threat response, the orbital frontal is the brakes.
If Dr. Gur is correct, then a person who is overwhelmed by anger is literally, temporarily insane, until his amygdala can be controlled. Case in point, the 2003 murder of Betty Dodge by her son James Essick. At the time of the crime, Essick was an adult with mental problems, who had moved in with his mother. Their relationship deteriorated so badly that Dodge asked her son to move out.
And that set him into a panic. And he grabbed a sculpture that they had and broke it on her head and kept hitting her repeatedly until she was dead. And then he went across the street, turned himself into the police.
During the court case, Dr. Gur was hired as an expert witness and asked to evaluate the mental capacity of Essick. He did a complete neuroscan of his brain and found that 30 to 40% of the tissue was missing in the orbital frontal area.
So when the amygdala was saying, I'm in danger, I'm furious, attack, there was not enough tissue in the front to say, calm down. You have better ways of dealing with this situation than attacking what you think is the source of your fear and anger.
The jury agreed with Dr. Gur's testimony and ruled that James Essick was innocent by reason of insanity. He was sent to a mental hospital for treatment. Some might say James Essick was incapable of controlling his ability to sin.
The organ of our mind and what controls our behavior is the brain, and his brain is damaged.
But by the time an angry act results in prison or a mental hospital, the damage is done. Is there a way to treat human rage before it gets to this critical breaking point?
So is there a way to treat human rage? When they talk about this hatred, there is. And it is called meditation, bhavana. Because when you meditate, the scientists have proven, when you meditate, you're actually sharpening the prefrontal cortex. You're making the prefrontal cortex more activated. And at the same time, it is dulling the amygdala, it's dulling the emotional brain. So making your emotional brain go to rest, and therefore your thinking brain is more activated. The amygdala especially will become tame and tired. So it will become tame and calm. So over time, as you meditate, the more you meditate, the more you're sharpening your prefrontal cortex, and the more you are actually taming and calming your amygdala. A person who meditates and succeeds in benefiting from the meditation will become less reactive, will become less emotional. When something terrible can happen, the person can remain to stay calm, because that cultivation can help to sharpen up your thinking brain so that you now think rationally what can be done to overcome the problem, while at the same time your amygdala will not be aroused so easily, you will not react unconsciously. Because when the amygdala is aroused and reacts, you are reacting unconsciously. So it is your thinking brain that can help you. So let's take a quick look at the thinking brain. There is this parietal lobe over the top, there is this occipital lobe at the back, and there is this temporal lobe on the side. But finally, the most important one is this frontal lobe in the front here. And all this frontal lobe is responsible for these functions. That is attention system, long-term memory, logic, critical thinking, and so on. But it is the last two. If you think about it, it is the last two that is responsible for your happiness. This is basically because of this prefrontal cortex in the front here. These last two is decision-making, goal setting, planning, judgment, reasoning, and rationalizing. Decision-making is to be able to decide what do you want to do. And goal setting is to be able to set good, wholesome goals. I want to be happy. Right? And planning, then you begin to plan how you can actually become happy. That is to attend more meditation retreat. Right? So you plan to do those things. And then judgment is to be able to see right from wrong, good from bad. To be able to differentiate what is wholesome and unwholesome, skillful and unskillful. And then you can pick to do only the good things. Reasoning is to be able to understand what leads to another, cause and effect. To be able to appreciate cause and effect and realize that if you take care of the good things, then good things will come to your life. And finally, rationalizing is then to be able to weigh between your resources. How can you manage your resources, your time, your energy, your focus, and the people around you? How you can balance between them and bring more happiness. So it's really your thinking brain, the mano part of your brain, not the chitta, the emotional brain. It is your thinking brain, the mano part of your brain that's going to help you. And the Buddha actually said that in the first verse of Dhammapada. Mano pubangama dhamma, mano seta mano maya. And this is often translated as mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their master. They are all mind-made. Notice that this is again a translation of the word mano to mind. But I'm offering you an alternate translation from my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji. He says, the Buddha really meant not mind, but our thinking mind. The cognition, the intellect. Because the Buddha used the word mano here. Previously, you saw the Buddha use the word chitta. So there's a differentiation. So here it is our ability to think rationally, our ability to choose good thoughts over bad thoughts. That can help us. Right? It precedes all our experiences. It can predominate and create the realities in our life. This is really what the Buddha meant. So it's very important when you read sutras and then you come across the word mind, try and go deeper into the Pali words and ask people around, was the Buddha referring to mano or the Buddha referring to chitta? If you can appreciate that, you can differentiate that, you will be able to appreciate and understand the sutra better. As I have pointed out to you, emotions dominate the world, but it is really your thinking mind, your intellect that can help you bring more happiness in your life. And the Buddha described this easily in the middle way. When he taught about the middle way in the DHAMMACAKKAPPAVATTANA Sutra, the first thing he spoke about is actually the middle way. He says there are two extremes to be avoided. The first extremity is to react to these sensual feelings. This reaction is the expression of emotional excitement by releasing tension in action. If it is something pleasurable, you want more of it. You become greedy for it. If it is something unpleasant, you want to get rid of it. You become angry and hateful for it. And this is to be avoided. But the other extreme is also to be avoided. Now the Buddha knew about the first extreme. Why? Because before he became enlightened, he was a prince. He lived a princely life. He lived in luxury. So he knew. He was surrounded by luxury. So he knew what reacting to sensual pleasure is all about. The other extremity to be avoided, again he knew it because after he gave up the princely life, he left the palace, he went and became an ascetic. After learning from 2 teachers, he wasn't happy. Then he joined 5 other people and became an ascetic. And he basically pointed out, asceticism is really self-tormenting, self-mortification. And he says, this is the other extremity to be avoided. So when we see, hear, smell, taste, or touch something that arouses our excitement, asceticism simply means, I hold back, I'm not going to react. Force yourself not to react. This is basically suppression of emotional urges by withholding all tensions. Now, if you withhold like that, sooner or later you're going to blow up. It brings suffering. Either way will bring suffering. Either reacting, emotional reactions to sensual feelings, or the other extreme, forceful effort to restrain your emotions. Either way will bring suffering. And the Buddha pointed out there is a middle way, a third way. Now, a lot of people would think the middle way is really a compromise between reacting to sensual feelings and also withholding. A little bit of reaction, a little bit of withholding, they are practicing the middle way. No, they're not practicing the middle way. That is called compromise. But a middle way is a third way. Middle way is neither reacting to sensual feelings nor forcefully withholding your emotion. What happens? What is the middle way then? When you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch something that arouses your emotion, what should you do? The middle way is conscious relaxation, introspective attention, and mental equilibrium. This is all described in detail in the Eightfold Path. The Sublime Eightfold Way describes that practice in details. Conscious relaxation simply means you learn to relax. So let's take a look at the middle way, conscious relaxation. What does it mean? Conscious relaxation means now you consciously, intentionally, you release your tension. Just let go. Relax. Right? Relax the body and calm the mind with mindful breathing, using your breathing to help you. So basically, learning to relax. When something excites you, just relax. Learn to relax. Don't react to it, because that excitement, you either react to it by wanting to indulge in it, or you react to it by forcing yourself. No, I'm not gonna indulge in it. Either way will bring suffering. So when something arouses your emotion, take a deep breath. Learn to relax. Don't react to it. And at the same time, when you learn to relax, you can bring your attention inwards. And this is called introspective attention. Right? So gently bring attention inwards. Gently. Don't try to force it quickly. Just gently bring your attention inwards and observe what's going on in your body and what's going on in your mind. Observe. Not react. Observe. And this observation will help calm it down. If you observe, you will calm it down. Take, for example, if this bottle of water, shaking it, a lot of bubbles. Now, if I continue to shake it, it will create a bubble. But if I just place it down and just allow it to settle, and I just observe, it will settle. The same thing when your body, something's going on in the body. So just relax and observe what's going on in the body. Something going on in the mind, just watch what thoughts arise and fade away. Watching the arising and fading away. And then the mind will calm down. This is how you can actually bring your mind to a state of equilibrium. And that is the mental equilibrium. To compose and still the mind. Bring the mind to a state of stillness. Stillness is samadhi. Samadhi, unfortunately, was commonly translated as concentration. And a lot of people still use that translation. But my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, pointed out, samadhi is really the stillness of the mind. The mind is still and not disturbed, not agitated. So it's compose and still the mind to free the mind from emotional arousals and emotional excitement. So this is really the middle way. Whenever something arises, something agitates you, something arouses your emotion, just learn to relax. Now, there is one sutra that describes this whole process very easily. And the Buddha mentioned it, and this is actually called the Vitakka Santana Sutra, Majjhima Nikaya 20. Removal of distracting thoughts. I'm going to first use Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, and then I'm going to show you my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji's translation in blue. So Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation is in black, and my teacher's translation is in blue. Basically, the first four are very similar. There's nothing different. There's no differing opinion there. It's the last one that there is some differences. The first one, whenever you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch something that arouses your emotion, the first thing you can try to do is to change your mind to think of something more wholesome. So let's say you're driving along, one simple example, you're driving along and you're stopping at a red light. And then you see this lady walking across the street and she is completely naked. Now, if you are a driver and you begin to stare, you will get excited. Here he says, give attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome. Or my teacher pointed out, an image contrary to this image which is worthy to be reflected upon. So if you see that, instead of getting excited, just switch your mind to think of something else. Right? Think of your plans for the day, or you can even think about the Dhamma, think about the Buddha, the Sangha, right? The Dhamma. Take your mind off this. So this wholesome reflection of something that is worthy of thought, right? Reflecting upon. So this is one way. In other words, change the picture in your mind. If you're watching a channel and it starts to show very unwholesome activity, all the rioting, all the killing, the murdering, and and it is really arousing your emotion, what do? Change the channel. Simple as that, right? So this is changing the channel. The second method, if that doesn't work, then the Buddha says the next thing you can do, if when you experience something like that, and you begin to examine the danger in those thoughts, or as my teacher puts it, consider the evil or unwholesome consequences of these evil thoughts. So if these evil thoughts arise in your mind, now you're getting angry because of what you saw on the television, you see what is going on, the rioting, and then you get angry with the way the police are reacting and so on. Just consider if that anger, if you allow that anger to persist, what will it do? What is the harm that it can do to you? Think of the harmful consequences. So this is the second method. Now, if that doesn't work, then the Buddha went on to say, there is a third method. Try to forget these thoughts and should not give attention to them. Now, forget is not so easy, right? But my teacher then says, stop paying attention to these thoughts and stop reflecting on them. In other words, if these unwholesome thoughts arise, learn to let it go. Abandon them. Let go the unwholesome thoughts. And take your mind off it. Don't focus on it, right? One of the ways to do that is to place your mind on your breathing. That's the thing that's going on inside you. The one thing that is always happening in you, that is your breathing. Take your mind and focus on your breathing. As you breathe in, just observe. Is it a long breath or a short breath? As you breathe out, is it a long breath or a short breath? Just focus on your breathing. And then your mind will be taken off that unwholesome thought. And if that still doesn't work, the next one is to give attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts. Now that is a bit difficult to appreciate. But what my teacher pointed out is that focus on relaxation and calmness, calming down the activity of the thought. That means when your thoughts are arising, just calm down and observe how it arises, what arises and fades away, how it arises. Just observe what is arising and just relax, right? So basically it's about relaxing and calming your thoughts. Now, these four are fairly straightforward. Then if that still doesn't work, then the Buddha offered the final one, the fifth one. Unfortunately, if you notice the translation, which is quite common amongst a lot of people, Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation is, with teeth clenched and tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth, one should beat down, constrain, and crush with mind. And there's something wrong with that. My teacher pointed out they overlooked one word. The word is called relax. So my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, pointed out, and this is his translation, he says, relax the clenched teeth, relax the tongue pressed against the palate, and thus remove thoughts associated with this, with evil easily, without exertion, without forcing it, and relaxing and calming the mind. In other words, conscious relaxation. Consciously relax your mind. Learn to relax. And breathing is the easiest thing to do. So, when I checked with other people, they said there's something wrong with this, because even common sense tells you, if you have unwholesome thoughts arising in your mind, can you force the thought out of your mind by clenching your teeth and pressing your tongue hard against your palate, and the thought will leave your mind? Can you do that? All the psychologists in the world will tell you that is the opposite of what's going to happen. What you resist persists. The more you try to force it out of your mind, the more it's going to stay there and fight with you. That's the nature of unwholesome thoughts. They are great fighters. The more you want to fight them, the more they will fight you. And that makes it worse. Whereas learning to relax, it will leave. As you relax, the more you become more and more relaxed, you go into meditation, the thought will go away. Right? Basically, the ultimate state of relaxation is to go into meditation. Now, is meditation clenching your teeth and forcing your tongue against the palate? No. Meditation is relaxing the body and calming the mind. That's really what it is. So there are these 3 steps of self-compassion. I call them the 3-step self-compassion. When something arouses your emotion, now all these make up conscious relaxation. When something arouses your emotion, what do? You pause. Do not react to it. The first thing you do is allow time for your bodily... See, your body has already reacted physiologically. Hormones are released. Now allow time for this emotional excitement, anxiety, right, to calm down, and your hormonal reaction in your body to subside. So when you hear the word durian, you hear the word asam laksa, and your mouth begin to salivate, what do? Relax. Don't react, just pause. Don't think about it anymore, don't react to it, and then relax. How do you relax? You focus on your breathing. Use your breathing to help you. Take deep breaths in and out and relax the body, and consciously compose the mind to respond. And finally, think about the consequence. So purposefully focus on wholesome and beneficial response to the problem. So this is the 3-step self-compassion, which is part of the middle way. This is the conscious relaxation part of the middle way. Pause, don't react right away, and then focus on your breathing. Allow your body to calm down and the hormones to subside, and then only think, right? So, and we often overlook this, the breathing part. Breathing is the most critically overlooked relaxation tool. It is the fastest to relax the body and calm the mind. Why? Because it increases natural, unforced oxygen intake. That means you allow your breathing to slow down, it will increase oxygen intake. It stabilizes your heart rate, and then it regulates your body temperature and blood circulation. It restores a condition in your body which leads to stability of the body. This condition is called homeostasis. And finally, it calms the amygdala, indicating there is an absence of threat, and that allows yourself to calm down. And then only you think, right? Think of the consequences. Think of what can happen next if you consider the consequences and change your thoughts to something more wholesome. Think actually is an acronym. Think of something that is truthful. T, H is helpful. I is something that will improve the situation or the relationship with the person you're angry with. N is whether it is necessary to say or do something in response. Right? Sometimes some things are truthful, but they may not be necessary. If you don't have to say it, then don't say it. Right? Because people look at me and say, "Oh, Billy, you're getting fatter." Yeah, sometimes. But is it necessary to say that? Because when you say things that are not necessary, not helpful, you're just saying it. Even though it may be the truth, you could be hurting other people's feelings. You could be hurting other people in some ways, one way or another. So necessity is an important consideration. And finally, K, most important of all, every time you have a thought, every time you want to say something, every time you want to do something, do it with kindness. Right? So this is truthful, helpful, improving, necessary, and kind. THINK. So that's a very simple acronym you can use. So I hope all this has been helpful. And finally, in conclusion, we have shared the teachings of the Buddha from a very scientific perspective. And basically, we have examined that sensations and feelings, they excite our emotion. And our reaction to excitement is tanha, and this leads to lobha, dosa, or moha, which is lust and greed, or aversion and hatred, or delusion of self-centered existence. And this will cause the mind to be very disturbed. And then learn and practice conscious relaxation and introspective attention. Introspective attention means to think, THINK. Right? And this will calm your emotional excitement and tame lustful and hateful reactions. And finally, you tame your emotional excitement and cultivate peace of mind with pause, relax, and think. The 3-step self-compassion. So I hope today's sharing has been helpful, that you have learned how to tame and your lustful and hateful arousals. Thank you very much for paying attention.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang